The silence before the storm, that moment when your back is against the wall, the weight of expectation crushes down upon your shoulders, the clock ticks, your heart pounds, and you stand there facing the impossible. Have you ever wondered why some people crumble under pressure while others transform it into their greatest strength? The truth about pressure is both simple and profound. It reveals exactly who we are. Not who we pretend to be, not who we wish we were, but who we truly are at our core. Look around you. The person sitting next to you right now is carrying a burden you know nothing about. We all are. Some burden of expectation, of responsibility, of fear, of doubt. We are all under pressure. But here's what separates the extraordinary from the ordinary. It's not the absence of pressure, it's what we do with it. Consider the diamond. Before it becomes the precious gem we admire, it exists as humble carbon, buried miles beneath the Earth's surface. What transforms this ordinary element into something of extraordinary value? Pressure, immense unrelenting pressure, temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees, crushing force equivalent to 50,000 times our atmospheric pressure, for billions of years. The diamond doesn't become beautiful despite the pressure, it becomes beautiful because of it. And so it is with us. When we face our most difficult challenges, we stand at a crossroads. We can allow pressure to break us down, or we can harness it to break through. I once knew a man who lost everything in a devastating fire. His home, his possessions, his security, all gone in a matter of hours. As he stood watching the smoke rise from what used to be his life's work, a neighbor approached him and asked what he would do now. His response? I'm going to start over, and this time I'll build something fireproof. That man understood something profound about pressure. He recognized that his moment of greatest loss was also his moment of greatest possibility. You see, pressure has a way of stripping away everything that doesn't matter. It burns away the non-essential and forces us to confront what truly matters. In our most pressurized moments, we discover our priorities with crystal clarity. When have you felt the most pressure? Perhaps it was before an important presentation. Perhaps it was when faced with a life-altering decision. Perhaps it was when someone you loved was suffering and you felt powerless to help. In those moments, did you discover something about yourself that you hadn't known before? Did you find reserves of strength, creativity, or resilience that surprised you? This is the first truth about pressure. It reveals what's already within us. But there's a second truth that's equally important. Pressure can be cultivated, directed, and transformed. The sculptor doesn't just randomly hammer at marble and hope a masterpiece emerges. The sculptor applies pressure with intention, with vision, with purpose. So too must we become sculptors of our own pressure. Many of us live lives designed to avoid pressure at all costs. We choose comfort over growth, security over possibility, the known over the unknown. And in doing so, we deny ourselves the very circumstances that could transform us into our best selves. Consider the story of the butterfly. When a caterpillar forms its chrysalis, it undergoes one of nature's most remarkable transformations. But there's something fascinating about this process that few people realize. As the butterfly prepares to emerge, it must struggle against the walls of its chrysalis. This struggle forces fluid from its body into its wings, strengthening them for flight. If someone, out of misguided kindness, were to cut open the chrysalis to spare the butterfly this struggle, this pressure, they would actually doom it. The butterfly would emerge with weak, shriveled wings, unable to fly. The pressure is not the butterfly's enemy. It is its essential ally in becoming what it was meant to be. What pressures are you avoiding that might actually be necessary for your growth? The truth is, comfort is overrated. Comfort doesn't challenge us. Comfort doesn't change us. Comfort doesn't create diamonds. Now, I'm not suggesting we should seek out suffering for its own sake. But I am suggesting that we need to reframe how we think about pressure. Pressure is not a punishment. It's a privilege. It's the universe's way of saying, I believe you can be more than you are right now. When you're overwhelmed with responsibilities, it means someone trusts you. When you face a seemingly impossible challenge, it means you're being invited to grow. When you feel the weight of expectation, it means someone believes in your potential. How differently might you approach the pressures in your life if you saw them this way? But here's where many of us go wrong. We confuse pressure with stress. Pressure is external. It's the demands, expectations, and challenges we face. Stress is internal. It's how we respond to those demands. Pressure can be positive. Stress rarely is. The key is learning how to transform pressure into performance rather than distress. Think of the concert pianist preparing for their debut. The pressure is enormous, years of practice culminating in a single performance. But the master pianist doesn't try to eliminate the pressure. Instead, they channel it, using that heightened awareness, that surge of adrenaline, to elevate their performance beyond what would be possible in its absence. The pressure becomes the very thing that enables their greatness. How do they do this? By preparing relentlessly, by focusing on what they can control, by embracing the pressure as evidence that they're doing something that matters. You too can learn to do this. Start by recognizing that not all pressure is created equal. There's the pressure we choose and the pressure that chooses us. The pressure we choose includes the goals we set, the standards we establish for ourselves, the paths we decide to walk. This pressure is healthy. It stretches us. It asks us to become more. The pressure that chooses us includes the unexpected crises, the losses, the circumstances beyond our control. This pressure tests us. It reveals our character. It shows us who we really are. Both types of pressure have the potential to create diamonds within us. But here's what makes all the difference: our mindset. When we approach pressure with a fixed mindset, believing our abilities are static and unchangeable, pressure becomes threatening. It risks exposing our limitations. It makes us defensive, anxious, likely to quit when things get tough. But when we approach pressure with a growth mindset, believing our abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work, pressure becomes an opportunity. It challenges us to stretch. It invites us to learn. It shows us the path to mastery. The same pressure, but two entirely different experiences. Which mindset do you bring to the pressures in your life? I once met a young woman who had been terrified of public speaking. The mere thought of standing before an audience would send her into a panic. Her heart would race, her palms would sweat, her mind would go blank. One day her supervisor asked her to present at an important meeting. Her first instinct was to refuse. The pressure felt overwhelming. But instead of avoiding the pressure, she decided to reframe it. She asked herself, what if this isn't happening to me but for me? What if this pressure is exactly what I need to grow beyond my current limitations? With this new mindset, she prepared diligently. She practiced in front of friends. She recorded herself and studied the recordings. She researched techniques for managing performance anxiety. When the day came, was she still nervous? Absolutely. The pressure was still there. But now, instead of being crushed by it, she was channeling it. Her presentation wasn't perfect, but it was authentic, engaging, and effective, and more importantly, it was the beginning of a transformation. Today, she teaches others how to overcome their fear of public speaking. The pressure didn't disappear. She simply learned how to use it as fuel rather than letting it consume her. This brings us to another crucial truth about pressure: it can be prepared for. The firefighter doesn't wait until the building is ablaze to learn how to handle pressure. They train relentlessly, simulating emergency scenarios, building both the skills and the mindset needed to perform when real pressure arrives. We must do the same in our lives. How are you preparing yourself for the pressures you know you'll face? Are you strengthening your mind through continuous learning? Are you building your emotional resilience through mindfulness practices? Are you developing your physical stamina through consistent exercise? These daily disciplines may seem small, but they're laying the foundation for how you'll respond when pressure comes. Because pressure will come. It's not a matter of if, but when. And when it does, another truth becomes evident. Pressure reveals our priorities. Under enough pressure, our pretenses fall away. We discover what truly matters to us. The parent who finds superhuman strength to save their child, the leader who stands firm in their values despite enormous consequences, the artist who persists in their vision despite rejection after rejection. Pressure burns away the non-essential and leaves only what's real. What would pressure reveal about your priorities, about what you truly value, about what you're willing to fight for? These are uncomfortable questions, but they're vital ones, because our response to pressure doesn't just reveal who we are, it shapes who we become. Every time we face pressure and respond with courage, with integrity, with persistence, we're reinforcing those qualities within ourselves. We're becoming people who can be counted on when it matters most. Conversely, every time we shrink from pressure, make excuses, or blame others, we're reinforcing those habits too. We're becoming people who cannot be trusted in crucial moments. Who are you becoming through your response to pressure? I once spoke with a coach who worked with elite athletes. I asked him what separated the truly great from the merely good. His answer surprised me. It's not talent, he said. They all have talent. It's not even work ethic, though that matters enormously. What is it then, I asked. It's how they respond to pressure, he replied. The great ones, they don't just tolerate pressure, they thrive on it. They see it as their competitive advantage. While others are trying to escape the pressure, they're figuring out how to use it. He went on to explain that these athletes had learned to recognize the physical sensations of pressure, the accelerated heartbeat, the heightened awareness, the surge of adrenaline, not as signs of impending failure, but as their body's way of preparing for exceptional performance. The difference, he said, is that they've trained themselves to interpret these signals as helpful rather than harmful. Same physical response, completely different mental interpretation. This insight applies far beyond athletics. In every domain of human achievement, business, art, leadership, service, those who excel have learned to reinterpret pressure as a pathway to their best work, rather than an obstacle to it. But what about when the pressure becomes truly overwhelming? What about when it feels not like the force that creates diamonds, but the force that might shatter us completely? In these moments, another truth about pressure becomes apparent. We were never meant to bear it alone. The strongest people I've ever met aren't those who insist on handling everything themselves. They're those who know when and how to ask for help. Consider the mighty redwood trees. They can withstand tremendous pressure from wind and storms, growing to heights of over 300 feet. But here's what's fascinating. Redwoods have relatively shallow root systems. How do they remain standing despite this apparent vulnerability? The answer lies in how they grow, not in isolation, but in groves. Their roots intertwine beneath the soil, creating a network of mutual support. When pressure comes in the form of powerful winds, they stand together, distributing the force among many rather than leaving each tree to face it alone. We would do well to learn from the redwoods. Who are the people in your life who help you bear pressure? Who stands with you when the winds are strongest? And equally important, for whom do you play this role? Sometimes the greatest act of courage under pressure isn't bearing it stoically. It's being vulnerable enough to reach out your hand and say, I can't do this alone. This brings us to perhaps the most counterintuitive truth about pressure. The greatest way to handle it is often to surrender to it. Not in the sense of giving up, but in the sense of releasing our desperate need to control outcomes. Consider the martial art of Aikido. Unlike fighting styles that meet force with greater force, Aikido teaches practitioners to blend with the energy of an attack, redirecting it rather than resisting it head-on. When we try to control everything under pressure, we create more resistance, more tension, more stress. But when we learn to flow with the pressure, accepting what we cannot change while focusing our energy on what we can, we discover a profound kind of power. I once knew a businessman who had built a successful company over 3 decades. Then, almost overnight, his industry was transformed by new technology. Everything he had built seemed suddenly outdated, irrelevant. The pressure was immense. His first instinct was to fight against the change, to insist that the old ways were better, to resist the transformation that was clearly coming. But after months of struggling, of declining revenue, of watching competitors adapt while he stagnated, he had a realization. He couldn't control the changing tide of his industry, but he could control how he responded to it. Instead of continuing to resist, he surrendered to the reality of change. He devoted himself to learning the new technologies. He reimagined his company not as it had been, but as it could be. He even partnered with some of the young innovators who had disrupted his industry. 3 years later, his company wasn't just surviving, it was thriving in ways he couldn't have imagined before the crisis. By surrendering to the pressure rather than battling against it, he discovered new possibilities that resistance would have kept hidden from him. What pressures in your life are you fighting that you might be better served by accepting? What if, instead of asking, how can I make this pressure go away, you asked, what is this pressure trying to teach me? Because ultimately that's what pressure is, a teacher. Perhaps the most important teacher we'll ever have. Pressure teaches us about our strengths, capacities we might never discover in easier circumstances. Pressure teaches us about our weaknesses, areas where we need growth, support, or new strategies. Pressure teaches us about our values, what we're willing to fight for when fighting becomes necessary. Pressure teaches us about our connections, who stands with us when standing becomes difficult, and most importantly, pressure teaches us about our potential, what we're capable of becoming when transformation becomes essential. Remember the diamond, it doesn't just withstand pressure, it is fundamentally transformed by it, carbon to diamond, ordinary to extraordinary, common to precious. So too can pressure transform us, not just revealing who we are, but reshaping who we might become. But this transformation doesn't happen automatically. It requires something from us. It requires that we stay in the pressure long enough for change to occur. This is where so many of us fall short. We want the transformation without the pressure. We want the glory without the struggle. We want the victory without the battle. But nature allows no such shortcuts. The diamond endures pressure not for moments or days, but for eons. The butterfly struggles against the chrysalis not for seconds, but for however long the breakthrough requires. And so must we be willing to endure, not with grim resignation, but with hopeful anticipation of the transformation that pressure makes possible. This is not about glorifying suffering or romanticizing hardship. It's about recognizing that our most difficult experiences often contain our most significant opportunities for growth. I'm reminded of research on what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, the positive psychological changes that can occur after people have struggled with highly challenging life circumstances. These researchers have found that many people who endure severe adversity don't just recover to their previous state. They actually experience profound positive changes in how they view themselves, their relationships, and their priorities. They develop greater appreciation for life. They discover new possibilities. They find deeper connection with others. They gain personal strength. They experience spiritual growth or a deeper sense of meaning. The pressure doesn't just return them to who they were before. It transforms them into something new, something more. But here's the caveat. This growth doesn't happen automatically. It requires that we engage with our challenges rather than merely endure them. It requires that we search for meaning in our struggles rather than simply try to escape them. How are you engaging with the pressures in your life? Are you merely trying to survive them, or are you actively seeking to be transformed by them? The difference is crucial, because here's the final truth about pressure: it never goes away completely. As we grow, as we develop, as we take on greater responsibilities and pursue bolder dreams, new pressures emerge. The pressure of leading others, the pressure of maintaining excellence, the pressure of living up to our own potential. The goal isn't to eliminate pressure from our lives. That would mean eliminating growth, challenge, and ultimately meaning itself. The goal is to develop our capacity to thrive under pressure, to become like those elite performers who see pressure not as their enemy, but as their ally in achieving extraordinary things. So how do we do this? How do we become people who transform pressure into diamonds rather than being crushed by it? It begins with awareness, recognizing pressure when it arrives rather than denying it or being blindsided by it. It continues with acceptance, acknowledging that pressure is an inevitable part of any meaningful life rather than resenting it or feeling victimized by it. It deepens with preparation, developing the skills, habits, and mindsets that allow us to respond effectively to pressure rather than being overwhelmed by it. And it culminates in transformation, using pressure as a catalyst for becoming more of who we're capable of being rather than letting it diminish us. This is the journey from carbon to diamond, from ordinary to extraordinary, from who we are to who we might become. And it's available to every single one of us. So the next time you feel the weight of expectation, the next time your back is against the wall, the next time the clock is ticking and your heart is pounding and you're facing the seemingly impossible, remember this: pressure isn't your enemy, it's your opportunity. Pressure doesn't define you, your response to it does. Pressure doesn't determine your limits, it reveals your possibilities. And just like the humble carbon deep beneath the Earth's surface, you too have within you the potential to transform under pressure, to become something rare, valuable, and beautiful. Not despite the pressure, but because of it. The diamond awaits. The choice is yours. Have you ever stood at the edge of a cliff, looking down at the vast expanse below, and felt that mixture of terror and exhilaration? That feeling, that tightness in your chest, that dryness in your mouth, that electrical current running through your body, that's not just fear. That's potential energy. That's your body preparing you for something extraordinary. Most people back away from the edge. They retreat to safety, to comfort, to the known. And there's no shame in that choice. Safety has its place. But what if just once you stepped closer to the edge instead of away from it? I remember a conversation with a mountain climber who had scaled some of the most challenging peaks in the world. I asked him why he did it, why he repeatedly put himself under the extreme pressure of conditions that could easily kill him. His answer has stayed with me for years. Because on the mountain, he said, everything becomes clear. All the noise of everyday life falls away. All that matters is the next handhold, the next foothold, the next breath. Under that kind of pressure, I discover who I really am. Then he said something that truly struck me. Most people never find out who they really are because they never put themselves in situations that would reveal it to them. Think about that for a moment. Could it be that we remain strangers to ourselves because we so carefully avoid the very pressure that would show us our true nature? The irony is that we often put ourselves under tremendous pressure for things that don't matter, impressing people we don't even like, acquiring possessions that bring no lasting joy, maintaining appearances that have nothing to do with our authentic selves. But the pressure that transforms, the pressure that creates diamonds, comes from pursuing what truly matters to us, from standing for our deepest values when it would be easier to compromise, from creating work that reflects our highest vision despite criticism or doubt, from loving fully even when love makes us vulnerable. This kind of pressure doesn't diminish us. It dignifies us. It connects us to what is most human, most noble, most alive within us. Consider the pressure a mother feels during childbirth. It is perhaps the most intense physical pressure a human being can experience. And yet countless women throughout history have not just endured this pressure, but have found in it a kind of transcendence, a connection to something larger than themselves, a power they didn't know they possessed. The pressure doesn't break them. It reveals their magnificent capacity to bring forth life. Or consider the pressure felt by someone standing up for justice when doing so puts them at risk. Think of those who have faced imprisonment, exile, or worse because they refuse to be silent in the face of oppression. The pressure they felt must have been enormous. And yet, many have reported that it was precisely in those moments of greatest pressure that they felt most fully themselves, most aligned with their purpose. The pressure didn't diminish their humanity, it amplified it. What pressures are you avoiding that might connect you more deeply to your own humanity? There's a phenomenon in physics known as quantum tunneling. It describes how particles can sometimes pass through barriers that, according to classical physics, they shouldn't be able to penetrate. The particle doesn't have enough energy to overcome the barrier, and yet, somehow, it appears on the other side. Scientists explain this by saying that the particle, faced with an insurmountable barrier, doesn't actually go over it, it goes through it. The pressure of the barrier doesn't stop the particle, it transforms how the particle behaves. I believe something similar happens with human beings under pressure. We discover capacities within ourselves, resources, strengths, insights that we didn't know we possessed and couldn't access under normal circumstances. The single parent who works multiple jobs while raising children alone. The entrepreneur who faces rejection after rejection but keeps refining their idea. The artist who endures years of obscurity while perfecting their craft. All of them are quantum tunneling through barriers that by all rational calculation should stop them in their tracks. And yet, there they are on the other side, having discovered capabilities within themselves that normal conditions would never have revealed. The pressure doesn't stop them. It reveals possibilities they couldn't have imagined otherwise. But let's be honest, pressure can also break us. Not all carbon becomes diamond. Some just gets crushed. What makes the difference? It's not just the amount of pressure, it's the presence of certain crucial elements that determine whether pressure destroys or transforms. The first is purpose. When we understand why we're enduring pressure, when we connect it to something larger than ourselves, something that gives our struggle meaning, we can withstand almost anything. The research on this is clear. People who can articulate the why behind their challenges show remarkably greater resilience than those who cannot. What's your why? What purpose gives meaning to the pressures you face? The second element is perspective. How we interpret pressure largely determines its impact on us. Two people can face identical circumstances, job loss, illness, relationship breakdown, and respond in completely different ways. One sees it as evidence that life is unfair, that they're victims of circumstances beyond their control. The other sees it as a difficult but potentially meaningful chapter in a larger story, one that might eventually yield growth or insight. Same pressure, completely different outcomes. What perspective do you bring to the pressures in your life? Do you see them as punishment or possibility? The third element is pattern. How we've responded to pressure in the past shapes how we'll respond to it in the future. Every time we face pressure and respond with courage, resilience, and creativity, we're strengthening neural pathways that make those responses more likely the next time pressure comes. We're building what psychologists call stress inoculation, the ability to handle increasingly difficult challenges without being overwhelmed by them. Conversely, every time we respond to pressure with avoidance, blame, or helplessness, we're strengthening those patterns too. What patterns have you established in response to pressure? Are they serving you well, or is it time to create new ones? The fourth element is practice. No one becomes good at handling pressure without experiencing it repeatedly and learning from each experience. The concert pianist doesn't attempt a difficult piece for the first time on stage. They practice it hundreds, even thousands of times under increasingly challenging conditions, with distractions, with fatigue, with an audience, gradually building their capacity to perform under pressure. How are you practicing for the pressures you know you'll face? Are you gradually exposing yourself to challenges that stretch your capacity, or are you waiting for life to throw you into the deep end without preparation? These four elements, purpose, perspective, pattern, and practice, determine whether pressure will crush us or create diamonds within us. But there's one more element that might be the most important of all: presence. By presence, I mean the ability to be fully in the moment when pressure comes, neither escaping into the past or future, nor dissociating from the experience entirely. When we're present under pressure, we can respond to what's actually happening rather than to our fears about what might happen or our stories about what should be happening. We can access our resources, make clear decisions, and take decisive action. This kind of presence is rare. Most of us, when pressure arrives, immediately leave the present moment. We catastrophize about the future. What if I fail completely? We ruminate about the past. Why didn't I prepare better? We compare our situation to others. No one else seems to struggle with this. We escape into fantasy. I wish I were anywhere but here. All of these mental movements take us away from the only place where we can actually respond effectively to pressure, the present moment. The martial artist who thinks about getting hit will get hit. The one who stays present with the actual attack can respond to it effectively. The speaker who worries about forgetting their words will forget their words. The one who stays present with the audience can connect authentically, even if the prepared script vanishes. The leader who becomes fixated on potential failure will miss the actual opportunities emerging in the crisis. The one who stays present with what's happening can guide their team through the turbulence to safe harbor. Presence under pressure is not just a nice idea, it's a superpower. And like all superpowers, it can be developed through consistent practice. This brings us back to where we began, with the diamond, formed deep within the earth under conditions of extreme pressure and heat. But here's what's fascinating. Not all carbon becomes diamond. Most becomes graphite, the soft gray material in your pencil. Same element, same pressure, completely different outcome. What determines whether carbon becomes graphite or diamond? It's the conditions under which the pressure is applied. For a diamond to form, the pressure must be applied with the right intensity, at the right temperature for the right duration. Change any of these variables, and you get graphite instead of diamond. So too with us. It's not just about enduring pressure. It's about creating the right conditions for that pressure to transform us, rather than diminish us. Are you creating conditions in your life where pressure can transform you into your best self, rather than crush you into your worst? Are you surrounding yourself with people who believe in your capacity to grow through challenges? Are you engaging in practices that build your resilience before pressure arrives? Are you developing the perspective that allows you to see pressure as a pathway rather than a punishment? These aren't just philosophical questions. They're practical ones that determine whether the inevitable pressures of life will create diamonds within you or leave you broken and bitter. The choice, as always, is yours. Not the choice to avoid pressure. That's largely beyond our control. But the choice of how to prepare for it, how to interpret it, how to respond to it, and ultimately, how to be transformed by it. So I ask you one final time, what will you do with the pressure in your life? Will you resent it, fight against it, try desperately to escape it? Or will you embrace it as the force that can reveal your true strength, resilience, and beauty? Will you let it crush you, or will you let it create something magnificent within you? The diamond or the dust, the transformation or the tragedy, the growth or the grievance, the pressure remains the same. The difference is you.